This is a margin call. There's got to be tens of trillions of dollars of losses in derivatives now. This is history being made.
Hey friends, thanks so much for joining us. I have a very urgent update from the one and only Bill Holter from JS Mineset. Of course, we post all of Bill's material over at sgtreport.com. Bill contacted me and wanted to do an update to share important information with our audience. And Bill's here right now. Bill, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate you having me on. This is the first, just so you know, this is the first interview ever that I asked to do because I think the timing of this is it.
Okay.
We're watching we're watching the margin call, we're watching the meltdown, and there's so much stuff going on. I was thinking we could do this in 10 or 15 minutes, but there's too much stuff.
We're having this conversation on Friday with the Dow down nearly 3%, the NASDAQ down 3.2%. We've been documenting the collapse for a very long time, Bill. Why don't you bring us up to speed on your perspective?
You're watching global stock markets around the world collapse, but that's not the real story. The real story is the credit markets. For instance, yesterday we saw the Dow bounce 200 some odd points, but yet credit did not bounce. The high yield sector was still collapsing yesterday. Forecast what's happening today. This is a margin call. There's got to be tens of trillions of dollars of losses in derivatives now. And as we've spoken about all along, that's a zero-sum game. There's a winner and there's a loser. And the movements have been so large and the losses so large, there have got to be dead bodies all over. They are not going to be able to pay the winners, which make the winners losers. It's an outright collapse is what we're looking at.
Bill, when we think about the derivatives market and we think about the bets, the leverage bets that Wall Street and Wall Street insiders have been making, if we think about margin calls based on outstanding margin loans, even by retail investors, when things start to collapse at the pace at which we see them collapsing right now, and you take into account leveraged bets, derivatives, things of that nature. I just watched the movie The Big Short the other night, and the same thing that went on in 2007, 2008 is happening now, but now it's 2008 on steroids because nothing changed, nothing was fixed, and none of the bad guys, none of the criminals on Wall Street went to prison.
You're exactly right. Nothing's been fixed. The only difference is there's more leverage in the system. There's more debt, there's more derivatives, and this time around, there are no sovereign, there are no central banks nor sovereign treasuries with the ability to leverage up. We reflated after 2008, 2009 because the sovereigns put their balance sheets on the line. And now they have no more room to leverage up. One thing that's quite interesting, Hugo Salinas Price had alerted the community to this, that Bloomberg had been calculating on a running basis the amount of reserves that foreign central banks were dumping, basically treasuries. Bloomberg stopped quoting that back in I think it was December 8th, and they just brought that up to speed, and it's $1 trillion. So there's been $1 trillion worth of treasuries sold for cash, but there's not been any type of bookkeeping entry at the treasury. So where did those treasuries go? I mean, who bought them? Who put the cash out? Who put the cash into these central banks? And the best guess, I saw Rob Kirby had mentioned it's almost a sure bet that it's the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which their books are private, their books are closed, we'll never see them, but I'm thinking that's the only place that those bonds could have gone.
Well, we've talked to Rob Kirby too, Bill, and he and Jim Willie and you do such terrific research. You guys are always out on the cutting edge of what's really going on behind the scenes. The Exchange Stabilization Fund, as Rob has told us in the past, is really the ultimate weapon with
It's the lead
which the
manipulator.
pardon.
It's the lead manipulator.
The lead manipulator, the Exchange Stabilization Fund is the lead weapon and manipulator of these markets, of course, in concert with the international central banks. Getting back to that movie, The Big Short, we've seen so much criminality in the system for so long, Bill, that it seems to me that until we have a return to rule of law, there is no way to extricate ourselves from this situation. And, again, as we're having this conversation on Friday, we're seeing gold and silver spike to critical technical levels as this morning's chaos, according to Zero Hedge, appears to have reignited the bid for safety once again. We know gold and silver are manipulated by these central bankers, by JP Morgan, through the paper markets to shake people's confidence in real money. But when we see a crisis like what we're seeing unfold now, ultimately, gold and silver are where people and nation states and central banks are going to turn.
Right, and when that happens, there will be no such thing as, quote, technical levels.
Yeah, that's right. We've stopped looking at technical levels and charts for gold and silver a long time ago because that sort of quantitative research is worthless when we know that criminality rules and manipulation rules, and these banksters get away with all level of criminality. They sell billions and billions of ounces of paper metals into the market, and there's no recourse against their criminality. Now, I'll tell you the other thing that I thought was funny, Bill, is that just a couple weeks ago, we heard the Fed saying, oh, we'll probably be raising rates 4 or 5 times this year because the economy is so healthy. And now today we have the New York Fed president saying if the economy weakens further, they'd consider negative interest rates. That's Fed President Dudley. He says, negative interest rates. Where have we heard that before? They're going to take everybody's savings to bail these banks out again, aren't they?
And we're only a month out from the rate hike. The Fed has, as far as the employment numbers are concerned, and that's what they were saying that they were looking at, employment's good. Employment's not good. The U6 number, which they used to use, is 9.9%. John Williams' calculation is, I believe, 23% or something like that. The Fed has lied themselves into a corner. They raised rates, and here we are a month later. The system's imploding, and they have no bullets left. Like Richard Fisher said a week or 2 weeks back, they're out of bullets. They're going to have to do QE4. They're going to have to go to negative interest rates. The problem is that the real economy is shrinking globally, yet there's more debt outstanding than there was back in 2008. The real economy we're at a critical level now. The real economy is not generating enough cash to support the debt on the financial side of the ledger. All you have to do is look at trade. Trade is shrinking worldwide. Look at the Baltic Dry Index. It's, 391 or something like that, a 3 handle. That number was 10,000 a few years back. It's so bad that Brazil is canceling Carnival.
I hadn't heard that.
That's incredible.
Aren't they suffering hyperinflation right now down in Brazil?
Well, they're getting hit on both sides. They're a commodity export country, so the commodities that they produce are dropping in value, and at the same time, so is their currency. So they're getting whacked on both sides, inflation and deflation.
Yeah, this global economy meltdown and slowdown, it's grinding to a halt. You brought up the Baltic Dry Index. I was going to mention that as well. Lowest ever, the Baltic Dry Index plunges to 394 as global trade grinds to a standstill. Boy, I'll tell you what, the other thing is that consumers are tapped out. Here, according to Zero Hedge, retail sales end weakest year since 2009. And then this news item, Walmart to fire 16,000 as it closes 269 stores globally. There is no better benchmark than Walmart for the dis-ease and unhealth of the global economy, Bill. This is the collapse. And I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy to report this news. But the reason you wanted to come on and share this with the audience is that the collapse is happening. You said as we began this interview, this is it.
Yeah, this is it. It's here and now. And as I told you, I've never ever asked to do an interview, but I believe this is it. I believe we're watching the margin call, the meltdown. We're watching it in real time. This is history being made. Um, One other thing I want to mention, and this is political as opposed to the financial. Watching the debates last night, two things were interesting. They quoted Facebook data. In other words, what people are talking about. So that shows you right there that all your conversations on Facebook, probably, surely all your emails, et cetera, they know exactly what the sentiment is. They know what the sentiment is because they're data mining. The other thing, and we all knew this, but it hit home. I forget who it was who said it, and they said that we're two or three Supreme Court justices away from this country being lost. It's not two or three, it's just one Supreme Court justice, one more, and the country is lost. And you were talking about the rule of law before. I mean, there will be no such thing. There is no such thing now, but one more Supreme Court justice, and it's over. There's no coming back.
Yeah, you mentioned Facebook. It reminds me of the NSA, the total surveillance state, and rule of law. Here's the problem, Bill. As you and I have documented in many interviews now, and I've brought it up in many other interviews, that 1988 cover of The Economist magazine showing a phoenix rising from a burning pile of fiat dollars, and around the phoenix's neck is a gold medallion saying 2018, and on the cover it says, "Get ready for a global currency." This is the real deal. Okay, we're only 24 months, 23 months away from 2018. This is the timeline. What we are doing right now is literally documenting the collapse of the dollar. Okay, and right now the dollar's still strong, but that's only because it's the best of the worst. And if the Rothschilds and the global banksters have their way, the dollar's not going to be around in 2018, and we can already see Russia and China actively de-dollarizing, actively moving away from the petrodollar, and in fact trying to destroy the petrodollar through new oil markets and oil arrangements between those two nation states. And so your comment on that, and then I want to circle back to this surveillance state.
I would look at it as whether it's 2017, 18, 19, whatever. Our currency in the U.S. is going to look completely different. Uh, the strength in the dollar over the last 6 months to a year has basically been a result of short covering. It's been a margin call because there was so much dollar debt that needed to be paid down, and there was a scramble for dollars to be able to fund paying that down. You can see that with the reserves. You saw, as we just spoke about before, a trillion uh, dropping from 12 trillion to 11 trillion. $1 trillion worth of dollars were needed by central banks. So I would look at, I guess, the best way to look at where we are right now is we're standing at the gates of hell.
That might be the most powerful quote you've ever given me, and I tell you what, I don't think that anybody paying attention is going to take that lightly. It can sound like hyperbole to those who do not know and understand how serious the situation is. But, as we look at currency crises happening in other nations like Venezuela, it's very easy for people to say, well, that can't happen here. We're a first world nation. Well, guess what? Look what's going on in Canada, Bill. The loonie is absolutely plummeting against the dollar, and as a result, food prices are absolutely skyrocketing to the point where it's getting close to hyperinflation. $31.99 for a gallon of Tide laundry detergent. People are absolutely freaking out in Canada because their budgets cannot keep pace with food inflation in Canada. Last time I checked, Canada was a first world nation.
Well, the same thing is ultimately going to happen here in the U.S. The problem is the dollar is the reserve currency. The dollar will be last to go, but when it goes, you'll see standards of living, finance, etc., collapse all over the world. The dollar is the foundation to everything financial everywhere on the planet, and it's going to go.
We've been very privileged as the citizens of the United States to be able to benefit from the strength of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Unfortunately, the powers that be in this country, the central bank, and those frankly, at this point, treacherous leaders that have allowed our government to spend itself into oblivion have abused the privilege of that world's reserve currency. And now the world is fed up, Bill. The world is absolutely fed up. And so what you're saying is true, because what cannot go on forever won't. And again, circling back to China and Russia, we can see them actively taking steps to move away from the petrodollar as fast as possible. That leaves what buyers of last resort beside the Fed? Maybe beside the Saudis, and I don't even think the Saudis want to do business with us anymore. And the House of Saud looks like it's ready to fall. This entire paradigm is blowing up in front of our faces.
Yeah, I wrote yesterday or the day before that China has joined in on this debt orgy. It's my belief that they know this thing is going to collapse. And what they did is they've built out infrastructure. They built out infrastructure and they've bought gold. That's why, while the U.S., the West, has thrown a standard of living party, that's what we did with the debt. We took a vacation. We enjoyed it. And when this thing collapses, the U.S. is going to be a third world nation. And China is not going to be a third world nation. China has built infrastructure. Our infrastructure is dilapidated.
You know what occurs to me, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, Bill, is that, when you watch CNN or CNBC, MSNBC, Fox News, your nightly news, ABC News, when you watch any of these mockingbirds, the way they frame up world events, which is always a pro-U.S. government, pro-American stance and viewpoint and spin, you can see how, and what I'm reminded of is that scene in James Cameron's movie Titanic, where the orchestra is playing on the deck knowing that the ship is going down. The guys playing know it's going down, but they feel it's their duty, since there's no hope, to play this thing out. And that's what we're seeing with the Mockingbird mainstream media. They are playing beautiful music as the ship goes down. And most of the people that don't watch our information, don't listen to what we're saying, are not in tune with the alternative media out there, Bill. They're just loving the music and they think there is no problem.
That's exactly correct. The mainstream media is to blame. Everything from A to Z is to blame. But the mainstream media is playing and has been playing the beautiful music. And the people who work hard, go to work, they come home at night, they turn their TV on, and they're getting the bluster. They're not getting reality. And the lies have gone on for so long. Like I said before, the Fed has lied themselves into a corner. And this is it right now.
Now, I want to circle back just briefly to this surveillance state. You touched on it earlier in the interview, and I wanted to share a piece of information with the audience. I posted this over at the Phaser, and I think it's an important piece of the puzzle because, Bill, my feeling is that this is all being done by design. There is a global plan being put into place and orchestrated at the highest levels. Again, going back to that 1988 cover of The Economist magazine, how could it not be true that they could have been so prescient and omniscient in their forecasting that 30 years ago they predicted what's happening right now? This to me is evidence of the one world global government, the one world global currency. I'm not sure if they're going to get it, but what I see happening, and I want to tie in this surveillance state piece of the puzzle for everybody, is that they are actively working behind the scenes to roll out a global surveillance state. And this piece I posted at the Phaser is titled, "Beware Surveillance Software in Fresno, the Pope to Meet Eric Schmidt, Alphabet/Google." What does that mean? Here it is. The heavy surveillance state gets a boost with the already in use, quote-unquote, beware software being used by the police force in Fresno, California. At the same time, the Pope will meet with Eric Schmidt, formerly of Google, now in charge of Alphabet, a company worth $500 billion, and most of you haven't heard of it. Past comments by Eric Schmidt tie him to the political arm of the modern nation-state Israel. Face Like the Sun has done extraordinary reporting on all of this, Bible prophecy, the beast system, the one world government, and he asks, how much will technology assist in the establishment of the beast system? Boy, I've gone down the rabbit hole here, Bill, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you take all of this stuff and you put it together in a great big pile of evidence, you can see what they're doing. You kill the dollar. You bring the American people to their knees. You introduce a one world global currency, a one world government. You say goodbye to your sovereignty, your liberty, your future, and you kiss it all goodbye. And I'm not here to tell anybody that gold and silver alone is going to save us from absolute despotism, but it's a start. And what else can we do to turn this thing around, Bill?
Well, you're right, Sean. I said 6 or 7 years ago that policy in the U.S. had to be a plan. The bad decisions that were being made, the bad policies that were being put in place, there's no way anyone could be stupid enough to do what they did. So it had to be a plan. And I think you're absolutely right. Because of technology now, uh, they're going to be able to monitor and surveil everything. Uh, what you mentioned, gold and silver won't do it alone. Of course not. In my opinion, the way to control the masses is through food, and I think that's more than likely how they'll try to pull this off and control it is through the use of or lack of food.
Yeah, and the most effective way to do that is to introduce Agenda 21 policies, roll them out nationwide, and restrict people's access to food and healthy food. GMOs are certainly hurting us, but the best tool in their arsenal, the best weapon they have, Bill, as you well know, is the currency. And when there's a currency crisis, hyperinflation is going to bring people to their knees. Again, look what's going on in Canada. People are very, very frightened to see what's happening to their food budgets. They can't afford to buy healthy food, so they're starting to turn to crappy food, cheap food, GMOs, fast food. It's going to make people obese, sick, and ultimately, if we hit hyperinflation, it's going to make people starve.
Well, you're right. The currency itself is one way, and then bailing in uh, account balances, that's another way. So, I mean, you get a financial collapse and distribution breaks down, and then they restart the system up, but people have lost balances in their savings accounts, lost purchasing power on the currency, and what do you have? You've got people dependent on the government for food.
You know, I know you've partnered with Jim Sinclair over there at JS Mineset, and there aren't too many other pundits out there that are able to think things through the way he does and see the world through his unique perspective and lens. What does Jim have to say about all this?
We agree 100%. It's here and now. This is a margin call. You're going to see you're going to see this thing melt down. And he wrote a great piece between Christmas and New Year's. Get out of the system. I'd encourage anybody watching this, to go to the website jsmineset.com. Uh, I believe it was titled GOTS, Get Out of the System. And I think it was 12 or 13 point message of how to prepare. And it's not just buying gold and silver. It's not just buying bullets or buying food. Uh, it was very well thought out, a very well written piece. But it's going to be a Monday or the beginning of a week when this market doesn't open, and it could be any Monday, it could be any week from here on. I mean, it's the margin call may not or might not be able to be met on a Monday, and they'll have a hard time opening the markets.
Hmm. Yeah, that reminds me of 2008 when these guys would have their meetings over the weekend and literally were freaking out. I mean, the heads of JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Lehman, all these guys would be in a boardroom trying to figure this thing out.
Yeah,
And
that's factual. That's not speculation. I mean, throughout financial history in the U.S., it's always been weekends when they try to figure out how to kick the can.
well, I'm glad you brought that up, Bill, because we've talked in the past about a banking holiday, and people forget that that can happen. It's one of the tools in the arsenal of the bad guys. They could just call a banking holiday for 3 days, a week, 2 weeks, whatever, and there's not a damn thing any of us could do about it.
Right, you're stuck. You have what you have, and that's all you have.
That's right. Well, that's why we have these conversations, Bill. We've got to remind people that the end truly is near, at least the end of the petrodollar, and people need to prepare. I guess my last question for you is, if and when we see another market bounce, right? I think the other day we saw the market go up 200, 300, 400 points, but the credit markets were telling a different story. Can you just remind people how important the credit markets are? Where should we look to be seeing the truth behind the scenes, even when the Fed is able to paint the tape?
Right. The truth behind the scenes is the credit market. They can paint the tape with stocks, and certainly we're going to have a bounce. We'll probably have several bounces. The, the credit markets, the derivative markets, that's where the action is. And I'm guessing within the next week or 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, you're going to start to hear individual names like we did in 2008. You heard AIG, you heard Lehman, you heard this company or that company was in trouble. Once we get to that point, I think it'll be very, very rapid descent from there once you start hearing individual names that are in trouble.
Yeah, that's exactly what we saw in the movie The Big Short. We saw, these guys had placed their bets against the housing market, and everything was falling into place for these guys, these investors, to make billions of dollars because they were correct. The housing market was a bubble, and it was beginning to collapse. But of course, Goldman Sachs had fixed these investment vehicles so that even when bad news was hitting, the investment vehicles were not going up in value as should have happened, and it led to much consternation and frustration in those guys because it woke them up. It made them realize how criminal and corrupt the system was. And that criminally corrupt system is only more so now. So again, when we see all of this bad news happening, guys, and we don't see gold and silver spiking to the moon, it's the same thing. They're painting the tape and they're manipulating these prices because they can. And I guess, Bill, they'll just continue to do it until they can't do it anymore. And I think that day's coming. I don't think China and Russia are going to continue to put up with this. I know Russia's not putting up with it as it pertains to oil and the oil price and the petrodollar.
It looks to me like China has pretty much readied itself to move away from the dollar. That would be within the next month, 2-3 months, something like that. I think China is ready. They've got a clearing system. They've got oil sources, gold sources, etc. So I think they are ready to pull the plug.
Well, Bill, thanks again for your time. I can't thank you enough for all you do. We really appreciate your voice, your intellect, and your honesty. That's the most important thing, is the candor that we get from guys like you. It truly is the antidote to corporate propaganda. And Bill, can you just remind people of the website where they can find your work in addition to us posting it at SGT Report? You're over at JS Mineset, correct?
Sure. It's www.jsmineset.com.
All right, guys, we'll visit Bill and Jim Sinclair over there at jsmineset.com. And please continue to visit us at sgtreport.com, where we post real news, truthful news, alternative to the corporate propaganda 24/7. We very, very much appreciate your support, and we hope you have a wonderful week despite this bad news. Have a wonderful week ahead. God bless.